This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Glynn Tonsor, K-State livestock economist, begins today's show discussing the bullish cattle markets and the value of public data. Keeping the show moving is Mitch Ricketts, professor of agricultural safety and health at K-State, as he reminds listeners about the concerns and dangers of hazardous exhaust gases. The Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster in the show as they share their thoughts on adding more cattle breeds to a herd. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update from K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. Glynn, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Shelby.
Glynn, as we're looking at the markets, once again seeing them up, and how much up for cash?
Yeah, so it would vary by weight class for sure, but yes, the simple summary for this past week was we had another bull market tone in the cattle market. You asked about cash first. The fed cattle market, so cattle leaving feed yards, 5 market averages called at 231 the end of the week. That would have been up. Dodge City feeder cattle was called $5 to $15, depending on exactly what lot or weight class I might quote. 2 example lots, just for reference, is 57 head weighing 539 pounds, sold for $431. That would be up at probably at $10 from the week before. 79 head weighing 841 came in at 371. Again, stronger tone. And this was matched with the board. So CME futures contracts were up as well. So there's consistency, if you like, between the board and cash this past week. October live cattle closed the week on Friday at 238. That was up a little more than $7 on the week. October feeder cattle closed at 376, up a full $17 on the week. This is of note. I'm going to break down some meat things here in a minute, but my overriding summary would be lots of talks and engagement with producers. This time of year over the last 6-8 weeks, I've been trying to clarify that the majority of the price increase we saw in 2024 and real early in 2025 was primarily a demand story. And there's a positive demand story that has continued now that I'm talking to you here in October, but it's being sort of magnified by supply. So we're finally hit the point to where fewer hoof count and future fewer hoof counts and so forth, and sort of some pessimism that we can continue to put more weight on to offset that. So the net effect of less beef, I think, is really hitting these markets, and that's adding additional steam to what's a neutral to positive beef demand environment. So I want to impress it on you is like, why does this keep happening? It's great if you're a seller, right? But we keep talking about higher cattle prices, and I think it's sort of both supply and demand are supportive at the moment.
Glynn, what are we seeing for boxed beef?
Consistent with that, we saw additional strength in the wholesale market this past week. So choice boxed beef closed Friday at 366, that's up about $4 on the week. Compare that with select, was only up about $1 on the week, but nonetheless it was up. So closed Friday at 345. Both of those are off from their highs. So if you go back 6 to 8 weeks ago, would be the peak in those. So we've had a little bit of a pullback. Some of that is seasonal because we're working our way out of the peak grilling season as a country. My brother's in town from Austin. They're still grilling this time of year down there, but a lot of the country right getting a little cool for that. So you have some seasonal cooling on the grilling demand, but those are still quite strong prices. So I'm trying to put a bow in this is we're at some quite high levels on cattle and historically still high level on boxed beef, even though we're 6 to 10% off those levels.
And you mentioned talks and engagement with producers. And did you recently have an opportunity for that at a K-State event?
Yeah, and I'm giving a shout out, because I really like the event, and I'm well aware it's 3 weeks ago, but the Stocker Field Day that Dale Blasey over in Animal Science and Industry and his much broader team pull off the end of every September. It's one of my highlighted events because it's a very focused, like it's for one segment. We meet out at the facility. It was a gorgeous day. It's kind of a plug after the fact and for the future of that event. But I'm also doing it because I gave a joint talk to kind of kick that program off with Lance Zimmerman, who's a neighbor and friend of mine, who's with Rabobank. And this past week, a recording of Lance and I's remarks got posted. So K-State's ASI website, as well as if you Google on YouTube, you'll find our remarks, the Q&A session and so forth. And, stuff we touch on here and, folks you have on every week, so forth. Periodically, it's useful to highlight, that extended. It's over an hour recording. Lance and I shared thoughts for a long time. But if you want more depth, right, beyond just these 10-minute summaries and a PowerPoint file and so forth, I encourage folks to go there. We highlight a lot of ag manager decision tools. So like heifer retention and buying, there's ways to think about that just from a financial perspective. We kind of talk through that and point to people to Excel-based decision tools at Ag Manager. So I'm doing a little bit of a commercial on that event, the recording for education, and all the tools of Ag Manager all kind of one bundle here while I have a chance here, because I think there's a lot of questions that are coming up. How good can the days go on? Cattle prices are really good. We talk about that. We shared some of our thoughts about kind of the gray clouds on the horizon, right? So if you want to hear more about that, please go and listen to that recording.
And Glenn, while you're on, usually we talk about the meat demand monitor. However, not this month. And why is that?
Yeah, so we're here in the middle of October, and you're correct. Usually, just to remind folks, particularly if you're new listening to this, is the MDM or Meat Demand Monitor is a project based here at K-State and Ag Econ Department, funded by the Beef of the Pork Checkoff. And every month since February of 2020, we have done a deep dive into all things domestic meat. So it's a large nationally representative survey. It's now over 3,000 people every month. And the way that works is collect the data through the month. We get to like the 28th, 29th of the month. I kind of close the data collection. We turn on the machines to start doing all the processing. And then early the subsequent month, the public gets the results. Well, what they don't see in between there is us obviously generating the report, submitting it to both checkoff partner groups, and real narrowly here, USDA AMS, because it's checkoff supported, reviews those documents. Sometimes they request some changes, typos, whatever, they're approved, and then I'm allowed to publicly share them. Well, I'm highlighting it because it's just another example at the moment of government shutdown kind of consequences. It's not me taking sides on the shutdown. Do not take it that way. But I'm just being very clear that, I can't share. I have them in my head because I've seen the September report, but I can't talk about it because they're not approved. And that continues as we're doing this session right now. But I'm also including it because I'm getting ready to write the In the Cattle Market series. So LMIC is on this segment. Lots of your listeners are familiar with it. The LMIC is based out of Denver, and we're on a weekly rotation writing something called In the Cattle Markets, and it shows up in Drover's Beef et al. Multiple ways later. And the theme this week is going to be kind of how we approach public data and information. So I mentioned USDA, right? There's private data. There's more private data today than there's ever been. But you could quickly make an argument, in my opinion, the value of public data has grown too, simply because cattle aren't cattle, beef aren't beef, right? Most people selling cattle are price takers, and those buying might have a different set of information, right, than them. So the role of public data is kind of evolving. I'm interjecting it here because it's, I think, important to keep in mind. Some things keep going when we have a shutdown, and that's great, right? So I referenced some AMS market reports earlier when I talked about, like, for example, the feeder cattle market. That's great. Those are occurring, but not everything is. So we're working a little bit less information than normal, but also the fact that no one data or information product is perfect, and there's value in periodically reviewing it. Even if it's done, quote unquote, accurately and well, it might need to be adapted to keep up with the industry as things change, right? So again, cattle aren't cattle, beef aren't beef. As you get a little bit away from a commodity world, we got to keep that in mind. Myself and Ted Schroeder and a lot of other folks around here, Joe Parcell, Brian Coffey, have worked with USDA AMS specifically on, box beef work, fed cattle work. Joe and I more recently on wholesale pork reporting. Lots of examples of things that are done in the meat and livestock space, hopefully to help with that, call it review and update effort I'm alluding to. But I'm trying to interject this as the timing feels right, Shelby, while we're in a shutdown and there's lots of discussion about the shutdown. I hope producers take note of the value of some of these things. And at the same time, I think just as an analyst, it's my job to say there is value to periodically step back and review them, try to make them better. If we have something that's duplicative or kind of ran its course, there is an argument that we don't need to continue to do it. I concur with that. But you only come to that conclusion if we back up and do a review. So periodically doing reviews to kind of make the best use of our public resources is what I'm encouraging us to do more of. And I'm sort of using meat livestock reports as the excuse to do it here.
Do we see maybe a small break in this public data coming have an impact on producers or cattle producers specifically?
I think it'll depend on which data product you're referring to. I'm under no false pretense that 1 month of the MDM I can't speak to is going to change the average cow-calf producer's understanding. That's not the reason I bring this up at all. The July cattle inventory report is probably the highest profile example of something that has occurred each year, but it did this round, it didn't last year. And I think producers took note of that. So we do have examples of that. if you really back up and do a couple decade look at this, Shelby, there's parts of USDA AMS market reporting that are now deemed essential that now continue during shutdowns that weren't before. And I don't want to get in the weeds any more than that to lose our listeners. But the evolution over time, like during my adult lifehood of trying to help here, I think the last 20 years roughly, is the system we're in, right? Our societal system of supporting USDA and reporting out to the meat and livestock industry is increasingly recognizing the value of that, and therefore it's deemed essential. I think at face value, that is just credence of confirming the value of said information and sort of the risk if you lose it. So I'll interject that as if it's deemed essential, sort of by definition, it's probably a little quote unquote more important than non-essential, is hence the term. And some of these things in the broader meat and livestock data reporting front are now deemed essential.
So Glynn, as we look forward, what are you keeping your eye on when we think about our cow-calf cattle producers?
The comment about shifting from just demand support to demand and supply has really magnified the discussion about head count and specifically heifer retention, but also do I cull the 6 to 12-year-old cows? So the net of our herd size is not just the do I hold back a young heifer, it's do I send the elder ones to the market, right? The net of those two is what dictates the size of my operation and by extrapolation the whole country. We've been talking about that for a while, but there's heavy discussion about that as we speak. Hence my comment about the net present value tool and these resources on Ag Manager to make use of that. I fully expect that will be the number one question, quote unquote, on the ranch between now and next summer. I currently expect more of that expansion effort to be occurring in next summer, more folks to be holding back. That'd be the number one thing we're watching and talking about.
That was K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. I will link his talk with Lance Zimmerman from the K-State Beef Stalker Field Day in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing hazardous exhausts with Professor of Agricultural Safety and Health at K-State, Mitch Ricketts. Mitch, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Shelby. It's great to be with you.
Mitch, as we're thinking about these hazardous gases, what's the main one that comes to mind?
Well, the main one that we think about is carbon monoxide. And carbon monoxide is produced anytime that we have combustion or if we're burning fuels. What we're doing is we're combining oxygen with the fuel, and incomplete combustion will result in carbon monoxide, which is a deadly poisonous gas. It has no warning signs. We cannot smell it, we cannot taste it, we cannot see it. But it is deadly, and if we are exposed to high levels of that, it can make us very ill or it can kill us.
What are some common causes you see of getting that gas at too high of level?
We tend to see very high levels of carbon monoxide if we have fuel-fired equipment that's not properly vented to the outdoors. So in our homes, this can be things like a furnace that may have a crack in a heat exchanger, or it could be a water heater that does not have the flue properly aligned. In our garages, if we run an engine in the garage, we will get very high levels of carbon monoxide inside the garage. And if that garage is attached to the house, that carbon monoxide then can travel into the house. In our shops, if let's say that a farmer is working on a tractor or some other equipment, if we don't have very good ventilation, we will get high levels of carbon monoxide inside that shop. We can help reduce the carbon monoxide in shops by keeping doors and windows open, but sometimes that's not enough. And if you notice when you go to a mechanic's shop these days, you'll typically see a hose attached to the tailpipes, and that is an exhaust extraction system. That hose is connected to a fan that pushes those gases outdoors. So just a hose by itself won't necessarily cause that gas to go outdoors. It needs to be hooked up to a fan, but you can buy those exhaust extraction systems. And if you were to purchase one and install that, that would go a long way towards reducing carbon monoxide levels in shops when people are working on equipment. Another thing is that even very small engines will produce a lot of carbon monoxide. Many of the people who are killed by carbon monoxide are killed because they were not aware that they could get high levels from things like lawnmowers and power washers and gasoline-powered electricity generators. So even the very small equipment can be very dangerous.
What are some warning signs that maybe the carbon monoxide levels are a bit too high?
Yeah, in some cases there are warning signs, and in other cases there are not. Part of it depends on the person. Some of us are more sensitive to lower levels, others are not. Part of it depends on the concentration of carbon monoxide. At very high levels, most of us will not have any symptoms, and we may just collapse. And at that point, if we collapse and we're unconscious, we won't be able to escape, and in many cases, death will follow on that. But at low levels, many people will experience a headache, nausea, dizziness. Sort of feels like the flu, maybe you've got the flu, or maybe you've eaten something that doesn't agree with you. Many times when people will find out that they have a leaky exhaust system in their car because every time they get into their car and drive for very long, they get a headache, or they get maybe feeling sick to their stomach, and they'll take the car in and find out that they've got exhaust that's leaking into the passenger compartment of the vehicle.
Can there be long-term side effects for that?
Carbon monoxide can be damaging to the heart. People with heart disease are best to avoid any exposure to carbon monoxide. In fact, we're all best to avoid any exposure. But carbon monoxide at low levels is especially hazardous for elderly people, children, people with heart disease. And then at higher levels, it's hazardous to everyone.
And Mitch, are there some case reports that show the unfortunate signs of people not realizing they've had too much carbon monoxide?
Yes. One very common type of case that we see is people with who are using power washers indoors. This often occurs in agriculture. We have a publication on protecting yourself from respiratory hazards in agriculture, and in that publication we include a number of case reports. One case that's very sad. A 33-year-old farmer was using a small 11 horsepower power washer to clean a swine farrowing room. And the room's door was closed and there was no ventilation. And he was only in there for about 30 minutes, but he collapsed, and he wasn't found until sometime later. And at that time, unfortunately, he had passed away. We do have another case report in here about a farm worker who died of carbon monoxide while working on a tractor that was running in a closed shop. Portable generators. We do have some stories in here about folks being hurt from portable generators. In one case, 2 workers were found in a greenhouse and they were unresponsive. And a propane generator had been running in the greenhouse for heat and electricity, and carbon monoxide was found to be the cause of that death as well. Sometimes also when we're loading trailers, if we use a forklift in a trailer, that can often lead to carbon monoxide poisoning if we're in that trailer too long. Sometimes folks get poisoned by charcoal. If you are camping, it is not good to bring charcoal into the tent to keep you warm, because that charcoal will be putting off carbon monoxide. I know an individual who was camping with some friends, and they actually had a trailer. I believe it was a stock trailer, and they had the openings closed in it. It was cold. It was wintertime, and they had been cooking with charcoal outside, and they brought the charcoal indoors inside of that trailer. And Later that night, one of the people in the trailer woke up with a terrible headache, feeling very sick to his stomach. He had a hard time waking up. He had a very difficult time getting to the door of the trailer, but he got outside. He realized that something was wrong. He tried to rouse his friends who were also in the trailer. He had a very difficult time getting them to wake up, but he did eventually get everyone outside. And in that case, it turned out okay. They all did survive. But had he not awakened at that time, it could have turned out very differently.
So what are some major tips you have for people protecting themselves and hopefully reducing the chances of something really not good happening?
It's very important that every year in the fall or early winter, as the heating season is starting, we need to have a heating professional come in and inspect our furnaces in our homes. We want to make sure that there are no cracked heat exchangers. We want to make sure that the flue is working properly, that everything is being vented outdoors. When we have any other types of fuel-burning appliances indoors, things like water heaters, gas stoves, that sort of thing, they do need to be vented properly. We want to be very careful about operating equipment in sheds and garages. We want as much ventilation as we can get. If there's any way possible to work on that equipment outdoors, that is much safer than having it indoors. And if you do work a lot on fuel-fired equipment indoors, you might think about investing in one of those exhaust extraction ventilation systems that you will put directly onto the tailpipe that will take that exhaust out to the outside air. Another thing about our homes and any place that we are going to be running combustion equipment indoors, it is a very good idea to have carbon monoxide detectors. And these detectors, if they go into the alarm mode, that means that we do need to get out of the building and ventilate the building as best we can. If the detector continues to sound, then we need to call 911. And typically, the fire department will respond. They will have gas detectors. They will help figure out what is causing the carbon monoxide in the home. But you want to have carbon monoxide detectors, and you do not want to ignore them if they go off.
Mitch, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Shelby, thank you so much for having me.
That was Professor of Agricultural Safety and Health at K-State, Mitch Ricketts. You can read more on this topic from his publication titled Protecting Yourself from Respiratory Hazards in Agriculture. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and to conclude our show, we have part of a Beef Cattle Institute Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster as they answer a listener question.
They have a two-breed cross. They've added in a third breed, and he's wondering, am I watering down my herd? And to boil this question down, should I add another breed, or is too much heterosis possible? Or should I always be shooting for more and more heterosis?
I'll start with some thoughts. Heterosis is a good thing. And one of the big things we do is we try to get as much as we can from crossbreeding. But there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One, you can mess it up. If it's so complicated that you can't manage it well and you end up back crossing too much or something like that, you can mess it up. And the other thing is what breeds are you crossing? Because the biggest amount of heterosis comes from breeds that are most diverse in their genotype. So think Bos Indicus crossed with Bos Taurus. So that's where you get a big heterosis bump, because especially in reproductive traits in that cross. But they're the most diverse. And so if I can only limit the number of breeds I can manage, I want to try to use breeds that are very diverse in their genotype. It's going to get me the most heterosis. Now, the thing is, though, if the heterosis is not as good as the one single breed itself, it doesn't do you any good. So you got to keep that in mind too. So there can be some downsides of trying to crossbreed, and just if our focus is heterosis and not maximum production.
Yeah. So one of the things what I was taught is heterosis. Really, the benefit is there is a depression in several traits when you breed relatively closely related animals. They don't have to be sire-daughter type relate. Just same breed has enough shared genes that you actually depress some fertility traits is where it first shows up, but some growth traits and other things. So that by outcrossing, going completely away from the gene pool that has an advantage. So that's what heterosis does. It kind of gets us back to it. It recovers any suppression we got from breeding relatively closely related animals. So that's a good thing. And as you pointed out, Philip, those different breeds bring a number of traits with them. And so there's also this breed complementarity where I want the combination of breeds to meet my goals.
Over the last 30 years, we've had pretty similar targets for carcass quality, feedlot performance, other things like that. When we think about different breeds, the traits in those breeds are not as diverse as they once were. And so because in each breed type, we're all striving for that same targets. And so the breeds have moved, in my opinion, they've moved somewhat closer together in a lot of traits. And so don't just think about crossing breeds, think about crossing individuals that are diverse that could bring you some heterosis.
The last thing to think about, and it's kind of a caution as you get more and more complicated, because one of the reasons that you kind of like a two-breed cross is you're kind of aiming for cows that are 50% genetics of one breed and 50% genetics the other breed. And so you've got an entire herd that kind of shares at least a third of the same breed. And so you get some similarities, again, in your output, your targets and things like that. When you add another breed, you have the potential to have cows within the same herd that have a pretty different breed makeup. And that may not be your goal because you want a consistent product. And so I think there are certainly producers that make a 3-breed rotation work really, really well, but I think they have to manage that added complexity.
It sometimes depends on the number of cows and the number of breeding pastures that I have, and whether that's easy or really hard.
Once again, that was part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster. If you have a question for the BCI team, you can send it to them at bci@ksu.edu. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.